This is the hair. I always have to fluff my hair before I start, or else it doesn't feel official. So
it's a ritual.
It's a ritual. Hello everybody, Chawan here. I'm so excited to talk to Joey Morris. Hi Joey.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We're going to be discussing something that I know literally zero about, and even though I knew I was talking to you, I was like, I'm going to try to go into this as if, like you and I, we were at a cocktail party, and I'm like, oh, like, what do you do? And you're like, oh, I'm a daughter of Morrigan. And I'm like, what? So I purposely did as little research as possible on the Morrigan. We're also going to talk about something that I read that really moved me. You discussing your past and how you do this, like, primal scream magic. I also want to talk to you about shadow work. I think the witchcraft that you do is so amazing because it's not the typical love and light. It goes deep into the shadow. And that is something that I am so on board with. First, I wanted to say that I've watched some of your videos and, girl, you are rocking the pink wigs. What I really love about your channel is, I see you putting on the wigs, I see you putting on the rhinestones. So I was just like, oh my God, I already feel connected to you because of that. I feel as though a lot of people, they shit upon, especially women and especially young female witches who love to look glittery, who love to put on the makeup, who love to do all that. But here you are, and you've been doing these YouTube videos and doing these like witchy, like really intense, full of like really great information videos for years and years and years. You're obviously not just somebody who's coming in for the aesthetic, and yet you are putting on the aesthetic.
I think it's a very difficult line for me because we can never truly know what's going on behind the scenes of somebody's experience, and we don't want to try and take away from how serious they may or may not be. We don't know whether or not that they're not coming into witchcraft from a very serious place or a place of trauma, or we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And I think it can be very easy to fall into the trap of thinking we know that they're only coming into witchcraft from a place of aesthetic because they have fixated on that part to begin with. And I think when we're beginners, we do kind of get drawn visually because that's a strong way of connecting. It gives us a sense of purpose and a connection to something. We feel it on a level which is, we can't fully perhaps explain it yet, but we're like, that aesthetic really draws me in and I'm not quite sure why. When I started, the craft was around and there was a very sort of gothic-y, dark witch vibe, and I thought that was gorgeous and I really loved that. That's not quite what's happening now, but we have to allow people to kind of transcend from being purely beginner and not quite sure about the knowledge yet to becoming more learned and having an idea of what it means. So for me, I think it's important to try and get across a balance between depth and aesthetic. So to tell a story with the aesthetic that draws people in and makes people think there's something here underneath, but at the same time be providing a depth, a reason, a life path instead of just a lifestyle. And so they kind of merge for me and it infuses into one being. It's a very difficult thing because I understand, on the one hand, I understand people feeling like they don't want their witchcraft to be cheapened in any sense. They don't want it to just be aesthetic and nothing else. They don't want it to just be packaged and sold to people, because that takes away from the deep meaning that people have and take from their path. But at the same time, like, it's the horrible judgment thing that comes in if we're like, well, she's clearly just aesthetic because she has pretty pictures. And it's like, well, a pretty picture is a quick snapshot into somebody's life. We have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. And there are going to be people who present themselves very well and they don't mean it, but they appear very, intellectual on the surface of it, or they appear to know what they're doing. And then there might be people who are like heavily into a particular aesthetic and they do mean it and they are searching. So I think we have to be careful where we're placing the judgment on people when it comes to aesthetics.
You've written for Becoming Living God. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Kind of controversial because that's sort of known as like bro central in a way.
Boys club, yeah.
Yeah, big boys club. And I'm sure there are lots of dudes or lots of people judging you because, you're writing in a space that's like totally like, become a living god. How do you navigate that?
I bought pink wigs. I have been doing this for a very long time, and I'm in Become a Living God because the powers behind the scenes asked me to stand for women and be a voice for women and to open it up to more women. And there are other women who have come in as well that are helping, so it's not just a boys' club, and to open it up so it goes beyond the I don't know, the sexism that can happen in that space, and it can be controversial. To me, it felt like a worthwhile investment of my time to be in a space, to speak a different way, to shine a light on a different perspective, and stand in amongst all of that, even when it's unpleasant, because there is an unpleasant element that follows Become a Living God sometimes, and I have been targeted with derogatory comments and people following me and stalking me and trying to take me down for being a woman. But my immediate go-to is, if you're going to come at me for being feminine and working with a goddess energy, then I'm going to be more feminine. I'm going to do it more. Or you're not going to stop me speaking and having a voice, which I've worked for. We have to stand within the space, take up our space, and refuse to be bullied by people who are coming in with like this incel mindset. And telling a woman that she doesn't know anything because she's a woman. There is unfortunately a small element that just seems to hate women for being women, and occasionally I get the odd comment which feels incel almost. It feels like, oh well, you wouldn't ever give me the time of day, so why would you? And to that I usually like, well, why wouldn't I not give you the time of day? Why would I not have a conversation with you? And I've actually broken a couple of walls down that way, because what you're talking about is something that I believe in very much, which is the need for like a vulnerability, a rawness, because so much of social media, so much of what we understand about other people is what we see on stage. Because regardless of where we're at, whether we're on the internet, even in public, we're seeing the on-stage version of who people are. And sometimes we need a little bit more rawness, a little bit more realness to say, you know what, this is happening and this sucks. When we are going through a kind of harassment and it's not okay, and we have been taught to kind of just palm it off and be quiet, and women can be the worst offenders for it. The women are like, well, you must have encouraged them to, and you shouldn't have said something then, or well, if you were just a little bit less opinionated. And you just kind of sat there like tilting your head like, why would we want to be less opinionated? Exactly. Why do our opinions not matter? Why should we be quiet? Like, I don't believe in anybody should like make themselves small for the comfort of other people, especially when they're walking in paths of witchcraft and magic, which is supposed to be at core challenging people. It's liminal, it's strange, it's not meant to be cookie cutter and sanitized. So by very definition, by talking about things which are outside of society's norms, we are pushing that boat out already. So why would we then try and keep ourselves small in the act of doing that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Especially when women do baneful magic. That's when all the criticism comes in. It's like, it's okay if we do like that really sweet sugar and spice sort of magic. But as soon as a woman is just like, you know what? Injustice has been done to me, and now I'm going to do magic to make it right. All of a sudden, it's like society's just like, whoa. Like then we're labeled as like psycho. When I was looking at the things that you offer with Become a Living God, you actually offer a magic ritual to help people who feel as though the mainstream, modes of justice have failed them. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, I've been through that myself. I went through abuses in my late teens and received no justice, and it shaped me in a way that is difficult to describe. And you take on elements of becoming a survivor, and then you learn eventually to move beyond the idea of being just a survivor and to alchemize that into thriving. But because I've been through that, and I have been touched by many different people whose lives have had an element of that in it of itself, because like attracts like, and people come together in this kind of trying to find meaning together and try and overcoming the similar pain together. And so when I was asked by Become a Living God to put a curse ritual up, I was like, okay, but on my terms. Because they didn't have one of those, and they were talking about wanting it, and I was like, all right, but on my terms, because if I'm going to do this, then it has to be something that I can stand behind and believe in from a moral standpoint. Often females are not given their anger. It's like they're not allowed to be enraged by situations, but they're just supposed to take it. Now, the ritual for hire isn't just for women, it's for those who have found themselves in a place where nothing else seems to be obtaining them justice, obtaining them a sense of balance, where they've been so downtrodden, so hard done by, they feel powerless, and they feel that people are trying to take their power away from them on every single level. And so the ritual has been designed to cut through that noise and restore to them an equal energy exchange in a way to sort of seek justice, seek wrath in some ways, to stop their abusers dead in their tracks, to call on the Morrigan in her death scream element, in her banshee element, that incites fear into those who are dishonorable and those who have sought to cause harm. And by harm, we're talking the worst kinds of harm. We're not talking about let's have a moral debate on whether or not we should be cursing, because we're all capable of having a really bad day and this person was mean to me. We're not talking about that. We're talking about degradation. We're talking about abuses. We're talking about the worst of the worst. And so that's why that ritual exists, and that's why I will stand by it. These people, of whom I understand intimately, had their power taken from them, ripped from them in various ways. And so when they come to that ritual and they're at their lowest ebb, I feel like it's important to have people standing there and being like, you can stand behind me. I will stand for you. You may feel broken in this moment, but you will not be alone. And I feel like that is really important, to stand behind that as a ritual, as a service, and offer it through Become a Living God, especially because, you know, you do receive some of the hate through that. So in that moment of receiving that hate, you need to have something there that you believe in wholeheartedly to stand for. So when that comes in from outside saying, oh, well, the Morrigan isn't powerful, blah, 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 and I can just stand there and I can ignore that, because I know that this ritual is helping those people that feel like they have nowhere to turn. And that's important to me.
One of the first things that comes to mind is this concept of karma.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of witches, they think, oh, if I do curse work, it's going to come back at me threefold. That's like sort of like, you know, the common saying.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's true?
No. I understand that people do hold to the Wiccan tenet, but I think that is a cut and dry and oversimplified way of looking at life. We get into spiritual bypassing down that road as well. There is this thing that happens. It's like, well, you should turn the other cheek. You should always forgive. You should always let them get away with it. And it's like, well, when you're at a point where you've watched them, however they've managed to do it, they've managed to cheat the system, they've got friends in high places, they've found ways around justice because they're sneaky, then you feeling that you can't take that power back in that moment of cursing. And one of the best ways I've heard cursing described is that you take that venom that they've put in your veins, you take that pain, you take that hurt there, you take all that injustice out of yourself, and by the curse work puts it back where it belonged. So it almost becomes like a return to sender in a way, but a little bit more aggressive in terms of what you're doing. I've yet to see evidence that there is a threefold law, and that's exactly how it happens. And I think if we believe in something enough, we will make it true. So if we believe in the threefold law, we absolutely believe it's going to happen, then we find ways of making that our reality. And I understand wanting to have a moral and ethical standpoint and not be cursing willy-nilly for no reason. And, there's a balance to all these things. But no, it's not been my experience to see that, whatever you put out, you will get automatically 3 times back.
Because if that was the case, then let's talk about all these political leaders who are doing really shitty things to the world. They just seem to be gaining more and more power. So rather than karma coming back at them, it almost seems as though they're just enjoying the fruits of their actions. So, I
Yeah.
mean, guys, let's just look at the world. Let's look at reality.
Hmm.
Ideally, justice will be served. And I know, especially in a Judeo Christian world, there's this idea of justice, like somewhere, somehow. But all I can say is in this world, in this 3D Earth system, it doesn't seem to work that way. Like, I feel a little bit sorry for those who are so scared to take justice for themselves because they're just like, oh, even if I think of like bad things towards bad energy towards the other person, then it's going to come back at me. So I must forgive. I must forgive. I must forgive. It's my fault that I don't forgive.
It's a spiritual bypassing thing and a fixation on a positive mindset, which is actually really damaging for people. That the idea that you don't have the right to your anger, that you don't have the right to all of the emotions, as if those are negative and the others are positive. It's this either or mindset that happens. It's like, no, you're supposed to have the plethora of emotions. You're supposed to have all of those experiences. And at some point, I feel like almost cursing becomes like almost your responsibility of self to say no more. I will not lie down and be trampled on, no more, and kind of step up to that in whatever shape or form that takes for the individual. I mean, if you want to forgive and you're fine with it, then okay, but there is this emphasis on you must do this, you must forgive, and it's like there are so many examples of it where it's not healthy. And for people who've been through, sexual abuse, some of the abusers' taglines, through lines, very common are, you must forgive me, you love me, right? So you must forgive me. So the idea of this spiritual bypassing that comes in for other people, then telling the people who survive that they must forgive, it puts them right back in that mindset, and it just blows my mind. The Wiccan threefold law, it's nice. I wish I put nice things out there and they always came back 3 times, right? I'm gonna put some money over here, it's gonna come back to me 3 times more. That would be great, but it's not my experience with it. It's not something that I can feel and see and quantify. So who is it serving? It's control. It's control from people who have an agenda to sell.
I love that. It's like magic based, I think, in reality. And the reality is there are shadow parts to life. And if you're okay swimming in the shadows, maybe you need to. But if you want to get out of the shadows, then, I mean, magic, witchcraft, who practiced it? It was people who didn't have, historically, modes to mainstream power. Women, people of color, transgendered people, LGBTQ. These were people who would get killed, who would get ostracized at best if they went through just mainstream modes of society, and therefore they were using magic to try to help, I guess, shift the odds to their favor. It's not 100%, but it helps to shift the odds. It helps to kind of wax the bowling alley a bit so that you can at least try to get a level playing field. To me, that's what life is. And there's no shame in trying to create some equity if you are in a position where you don't have power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just so that we can go over sort of like Magic 101, how to do like a ritual very well. A lot of magic is about first getting into an altered state.
Yep.
A lot of magic also is about building a relationship with a deity. And people get caught up in the word deity. We're just using that word. You could call it whatever you want. And then using things that are in this world, like plants, mirrors, kind of like props in this world to help ground the magic. And your ritual had all 3 elements. How did you develop this ritual?
Well, the death scream in and of itself is something that I realized was happening in the process of my own subconscious before I realized what was entirely happening. So I had been sensitive to spirits from being very, very young. And something that had been happening to me quite a lot is that I was waking up in the middle of the night and I was feeling under energetic attack. And I was screaming. And I'd been a witch for a long time at this point, and I was getting really cross with myself. Like, you've been a witch for how many years? Things are still managing to get through the everything somehow. So I was like beating myself up about it. And you're screaming at them. You're terrified. You're like screaming because of them. And I just had this moment of complete clarity that was like, think again. And I was like, And what was actually happening is that I wasn't screaming in fear because of it. I was screaming in response to it. I was screaming at it. And I realized it was a Morriganic practice that was based in her mythology. So particularly with regards to her crone aspect of Babe, or in some cases Nemain, which some associate with her, there is a rich mythology based around the screaming and what that means. It's a death scream, a scream of the banshee calling forth death. And in the case of Nemain, her scream killed people. It just, in the mythology, that's what it did. And so that's the beginning of it. That is something that was happening to me and meant something to me, and I'd had a moment of clarity of realizing that it wasn't what I thought it was. It was actually a subconscious tool in some way, because I was literally Night of the Living Dead sitting up and like screaming, like it felt quite zombie like, and then like just screaming, and then I would wake myself up doing it. And so I was like, okay, how do we incorporate this into a system that works for other people? And that became realizing that death screaming doesn't have to be one pitch. It doesn't have to be one kind of scream. It doesn't have to be one idea. And it was taking it from the subconscious into a more proactive level. And then you shape ritual around what that means and how you would use that to defend other people. And like you said, a lot of the tools around it are going to be pomp and circumstance. It's going to be to elevate and to put me into a trance mode of what it means to step beyond and embody and take on the energies of the spirit of Morrigan and put myself into a position where that is more directed. And so the ritual kind of was created around the concept that had just naturally occurred to me within my own practice.
So you're mentioning now Morrigan. Is it Morrigan or the Morrigan?
The Morrigan tends to be what is used as a title. It depends on your perspective. So the difficult thing with a lot of the mythology is that how much of it we're missing, and it is how much people interpret it. So some people say it is the Morrigan because she has more than one aspect, or because it's more than one goddess forming a triple goddess, and that is debated. Morrigan works as a title, like an overarching title, and some people feel that Morrigan is actually one of her aspects. So some people feel that Morrigan without the is the aspect rather than the overarching. So you can use either. It all gets a bit confusing because she has like a shapeshifter element to her, which is like the primary thing that I connect with her. So it all becomes a bit fluid and trying to escape definition, because like we talked about earlier, when you get too much into a definition of what something is, then it doesn't allow for an expansion or a growth. But you can use either.
I don't know much about, I'm just going to say the Morrigan. I don't know much about the Morrigan, and I really don't know much about Banshees. I've heard of the Banshees because, that punk band Susie and the Banshees. That's the only reason why I know that word even. And I think maybe a lot of the audience probably has a lot of misconceptions if they've heard of her. Can you tell me, who is the Morrigan? Who are the Banshees?
She's a goddess of war, death, and strife, and rebirth, and shapeshifting. The goddess Morrigan is considered to be a Celtic goddess of war, death, rebirth, and shapeshifting. And for me, I connect with her shapeshifter element more than any other. She is tied currently to Ireland more than any other place in the world. You can make arguments of tracing her lineage back to proto roots and see similarities. But she has evolved from that point. She now is a very strong presence within many witchcraft practitioners' lives, in that she has evolved, and what it means to work with her has evolved, and what war has evolved, and what shapeshifting is evolving. And so she's very primal, very fiery. You will find her associated with ravens and death, and banshees in particular are the death aspect. They are Irish spirits, foretellers of death, that to hear the banshee scream in mythology was to know that death was coming. And so those elements are tied into her mythology in a way which is loose and people aren't 100% sure because of the nature of mythology.
Dark goddesses are kind of having their day right now. Like, how did you get into the Morrigan?
Well, for a very long time, I worked in abstracts. I didn't work with specific deity. I worked in the idea of energy. I worked in the idea of the masculine and the feminine concept, and I was fine with it. I was absolutely fine with it. I had prayed in the loosest sense to Mother my entire life, and so I came to realize later that the Morrigan had always been with me. It was just not that I hadn't happened upon the realization of that was the title for who it was I felt connected to, or the spirit or the energy, or that's how the perception of her is within this reality. So I came to a point where I did want to know. And then I started realizing that there were so many synchronicities that all pointed to the Morrigan. I studied history and mythology, and one of the only ones that I had not touched on was Celtic, which, given that I grew up in England, is strange that we had never touched on Celtic mythology and we'd never touched on the history. There were other things, like I had written a piece of poetry a couple of months before, and the line "the silent watcher at the ford" had been in my head. I didn't know where it had come from. It was just part of it. And it's one of her titles, and there was just all these little moments of synchronicity. And then I came to the realization of, like, I want to know who it is. And then I was trancing out and I was having full-blown experiences with spirits and her coming forward and being like testing. So there was a lot of a testing energy that came through to her, and she was one of the things that felt to me that was being asked of me was, would you change your life given the opportunity? Would you take back all the terrible things that you have seen? And my answer to that was like, well, no, because I don't know who I would be otherwise. That I wouldn't, wish terrible things on anybody, but at the same time, I am who I am today because I've overcome all of this. That was the right answer, clearly. So that's how I stepped into knowing, or at least a semblance of knowing. It's the human way of understanding this energy. It's the human titles that we have given to her, and the way that we understand in our limited little human big goddess way of perception that we have available to us currently. So that's how I arrived at knowing that it was her. And then I haven't really doubted it since.
Can you explain more about what her energy is like? Because it sounds like she's a mother, but she's like the goddess of war? That seems very contradictory.
Well, are women allowed to be angry? Are women allowed to be wrathful? So if not, why do women who are mothers naturally fit into a stereotype of being a nurturer? For me, a mother energy is not necessarily the way that the Christocentric way of what a mother should be is presented. They can be fierce, they can be ferocious, they can kill for their children, they can go through hell and high water, and their bodies go through hell just to bring children into the world. I think people get fixated in the idea that motherhood is sweet and gentle at all points, and sometimes it is, but there's also a ferocity to it, and there's also going beyond what the idea of mother and child means. What does it mean to be mother to a tribe? What does it mean to be mother to a nation? What does it mean to be mother to an idea, a political rallying cry for change? It doesn't necessarily have to be one form of what mother means, and nor does daughter. So it also, for me, was deeply healing. I had a terrible relationship with both my mother and my father. So for me, the Morrigan was what I had always wanted in a mother. Someone that was firm, tough, but fair. And when she was proud of you, you knew it. And it wasn't necessarily about running to you and making you feel better in any moment. It was like, you can get up. I know you can. I believe in you, do it. And it's that energy of motherhood that comes through with her. It's personal for me, really. It's a large part of it is about healing me. And that's why I call myself her daughter.
I like how you bring up that mothers don't always have to be that gentle, sort of stereotypical kindergarten teacher type. Mama bears, right? You don't want to mess with a mother bear. Fierce. And yeah, like my sister, she just gave birth. And, so I have like a 2 month old nephew now. And the amount of just extreme pain that she had to go through to give birth. And yet now her body is nourishing this child. And just from her breast milk, this baby is like, like huge. So when you say that you're a daughter, if mothers can be many different types, what do you mean by daughter?
I think for me it's more of a title than it is anything else. It's the same, for me it's the same as saying priestess, it's the same as saying witch. It's just, it's a term of endearment in a way that strengthens a bond, and it is a title. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that I am the legitimate offspring of the Morrigan or anything like that. For me it's more about empowerment, it's more about belonging and tribe. So it's that same thing that, daughters don't have to be of blood, the same way that children don't have to be the ones you gave birth to necessarily. It's those that you have chosen to take on, and it has that vibe to it. Like the Morrigan chooses who she speaks to, she chooses who she takes on. Frequently there are those who have been through periods of feeling broken and alone, and she stands by them. And so it's kind of an honorific title to me, I think.
How did you know that it was the Morrigan?
Well, the first time she ever showed up, I didn't. I thought it was a man. I thought it was a masculine entity. And I had a feeling like it was by that point, I'd had all these different synchronicities, and I felt in my mind, in my heart and soul, like Morrigan was the energy behind all these little clues of who it was. The first time I went into trance and had a visual of who it was, I thought it was like an envoy or a messenger, because there was this deep booming voice that sounded masculine, and the shoulders were really broad with like black feathered cloaks over it, and the face was hidden down to the mouth. And so the visualization was testing on purpose, which is something that happens with the Morrigan. She pushes, she shapeshifts, she tests, she goes to see what your answers would be. And so the first time I saw her, I didn't think she was her. But her energy is kind of you can't really mistake it once you've felt it, because it is just imprinted with all of this power and empowerment and sovereignty and this battle energy. And she's very insistent and very direct.
You say that she chooses her children. Does this mean, like, okay, let's say somebody's watching this video and they're like, oh my god, the Morrigan sounds really cool, I think I want to start working with her. That's not how it works.
That has not been my experience, and has not been the experience of anyone that I have known who has gone through working with a Morrigan. And that's because she's not really an energy that you arrive to by thinking that might be a cool choice for the weekend. Her energy is something that people arrive to because they have been broken at core. They have been through the worst experiences that human beings can be through, and they found her along the way. And so for me, it doesn't seem to be the case that people who just think they can pick it up and drop it find her that way, because it's much more of a serious commitment than that. It is the absolute resolution to, I have been broken, I have been hurting, and I will keep fighting until I find myself in a place of thriving, and then I will still keep fighting, whether it's for myself and or to assist others in similar situations. I think it takes a very particular kind of path for you to arrive at the shores of the Morrigan, and those experiences I wouldn't wish on anybody. So it's kind of like a dual-edged sword. It's like, well, I would like you to know her energy, but at the same time, it feels like there's a cost that I wouldn't put on anybody. But if they have had those experiences, if they have found themselves through the Morrigan, then that will enrich them and help them to overcome. I couldn't wish it on anyone. So when people say, can anyone? I'm just like, well, when you say not everyone will work with a Morrigan, people get upset about it, because it's like you're saying she's not accessible to everyone, and I'm an elite club and you're not, blah blah. And it's like, no, it's not like, it's really not like that. It's, are you sure this is something that you want? Because the other part of it is she holds those who work with her to a really high standard, a high standard of ethics and morals. There is no get out of jail free card. There is no like suddenly slipping into like not doing what it is that you've set out to do, and you will find yourself being put through the ringer on many occasions, you will find yourself tried and tested and forged by this path. And that's not for everybody. Some people need the gentle, loving, sweet mother. And so if they need that energy within their life, then this energy is not for them. I mean, most recently, I only got through a particular situation because I had a soul sister help me through it. Otherwise, I just found myself on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, crying, like feeling defeated. Like, how did I get here again? How did I let myself down to feel this low again? And fortunately, I had a support system in place which helped me through that, as well as my own resilience to overcome it. And so and that's as recent as 6 months ago. And now my life is completely and utterly changed from that point. And it was the Morrigan leading me to what I said I had wanted, which was independence. I wanted to feel independent again. The community came out in thousands upon thousands of people, no exaggeration, seeking to help me out of this horrible situation. So I was trying desperately to deal with that situation, the ending of that situation, by myself, because I've had in my head that I should be able to deal with it by myself somehow, and there was no way. I'd been isolated, and if I had adhered to that, I would have been ruined by it. And the Morrigan was like, you're going to have to break. You're going to have to cry. You're going to have to ask for help, because I hate asking for help. I hate doing it. And so because I hate doing it, guess what? You're afraid of it, so it's a lesson. Get going with it. So it's that again. So she had me break, and once I did, thousands upon thousands of people showed up, and they helped me move. The people came out for me. People came and collected me. People donated money to help me get away from this terrible situation which had drained me of life and money and happiness. And people helped me in their thousands, and it showed me sisterhood. It showed me community.
People are under this impression that, oh my god, once a dark goddess chooses me, I'm going to be invincible. My life is going to be great. I'll have this protector in the dark goddess. And from this point on, all the trauma, all the bullshit, it's behind me. I'm set. And I find that that's actually sometimes the opposite happens. Mm-hmm. You're pushed into the fire. You have to lean into the fire even more. This is the reason why I think spiritual bypassing is so dangerous, because you do have to walk through that fire. You have to walk through that shadow of the valley of death to be able to experience the ecstasy of being lifted up. You know, like the moment that you decided to be vulnerable and to ask for help, you experience something that I think most people don't ever experience, which is to have thousands of people reach out to you. And that is like the world hugging you. That's like a warmth that's beyond just like your inner circle. And so you have to go through that shadow to experience that sort of world anima mundi hug. You are also creating lots of magical materials in your store.
Well, initially I was making them for myself, and I had been taking pictures, and I was getting so many requests to sell them. And so in the end, I was like, okay, this is something that I could do with my life. For me, there's a story woven into each and every item. There is a soul in there. And if there is not a soul, then things feel like an oil with some herbs in it, and it feels dead. I've definitely had situations where I bought things and been like, yeah. And then people are like, oh, well, you have to infuse your magic into it. And I'm like, no, if you can't feel like the power behind a magical item when it arrives, something's very wrong. Yes, you should absolutely do some work too, but like a magical item should never feel there's nothing there. So I do a lot of custom work. Someone will usually come to me and they'll say, can I have a this, that, and that, a candle, a smudge, some stick incenses for the goddess Kali, or for the energy of luck, or something around that. And I'm like, okay. And you double check if there's anything that they really need in that space. Like, is there anything you're allergic to? Is there anything you really don't like? Is there any scent that's going to make you heave? Like, get an idea of who they are. And depending on what it is, you'll get a sense of the person. So sometimes they're more personal sets. They're more about like surviving and alchemizing and that pain and that things that they need to get through. And sometimes it's literally, I want some money. Can you help me? And can you make physical items for that? So depending on where it's at, and then it becomes a story. It becomes an energy. depending on the god or goddess, depending on how much I know or don't know, I will then do research. So if I don't know anything about the particular deity that someone comes to me about, if it's outside of that which I've read upon, I will go research on it. I'll go read some of the mythology. I'll get a general understanding before knocking on any deity's door, because I feel like that's a term of respect. It's kind of like getting to know the energy before you know the energy. And so you get an idea of who they are and what they stand for, or it's slightly different when it's like money magic, because we all know what money magic is. But I feel that there needs to be a through line, a story. And so with like money magic, my immediate thought is it needs to be bright, breezy, upbeat, positive, and keep going. Because a lot of people go with money magic and they're like, it just needs to draw in money. And I'm like, no, it needs to elevate you. It needs to, so you feel positive. Because there's nothing worse than when you get into a bad state of money and everything feels like it's closing in around you and you can't see outside of that feeling to generate more money in your money magic, because that's going to have a follow on through. So instead we create an energy, a soul, a harmony of like, it's going to be okay. We're going to open these roads. We're going to open these opportunities. We're going to bring in some money. We're going to like, everything is going to be attended to in this space. And then when it's deity, it's creating something to honor them and their path with someone else that you feel that they would be happy with. And it kind of resonates around the energy as you see them. And depending on the meditation, because I will meditate, I will journey through the physical creation of items. You might get an image, a feeling, a smell, an idea, a vibration, and then you create that story woven into the energies of physical products. So those physical things should look like, feel like, and tell the story of what it means to connect to that energy, and they should never be dead.
That reminds me so much of what Aidan Wachter says in his book 6 Ways, which is that going back to the idea of aesthetics are inherently magical. There are some things that just look and feel and smell and vibe in a way that makes you feel more magical. I mean, what feels more magical? Like going into like a room that, I don't know, is filled with stuff that you consider to be like work. Like you work at a corporate job that you hate. Or if you go into a room that's filled with things that to you remind you of a magical time in your life. Maybe you went to Italy and you went to the beach and it's, you know, the place is filled with stuff from that beach that puts you back into that mindset. And I think a lot of people, they get hung up on the fact that, oh, you know, like these oils and these things that I'm buying on Etsy, I don't want to like shit on Etsy, but you know, there's a lot of sellers on there who just got into this like a year ago because it's profitable. You know, they're hustling, whatever, you can't hate the hustle. But the thing is that they may not understand that there is an entire, like you said, story around magic. That story in itself, when you're doing a spell, you are basically spelling out what your reality is. You're creating a story of what your reality wants to be. When you work with well-charged magical items, your magic just goes like, whew, like it just elevates.
I've actually had people be more blown away by their results than they were anticipating, than they were expecting. And the whole point of the items, that at least that I make, is I want them to be evocative. I want them to affect you so you can affect your magic. So one of the easiest ways of describing that is through either the smudges or the anointing oils, both of which are heavily scented with essential oils and herbs and things. The creation of smudges, for example, is meant to, when you burn it, create an energetic vibrational shift in the space in which you are burning it. And it's infused with all of that, and the scent of that though will evoke something in you. So the combination of different scent is something that I love. I love this kind of perfume magic almost, and it's this woven song of symphony of different scents that hit different notes and take you to different places and trigger different memories, even if the memories aren't of this incarnation, even if they go deeper into the soul memory than it is something that you can understand. Those things should evoke a response in you, and your soul should recognize the feeling and the scent and the look and the feel of something. So then you start tapping into that magical process within it for yourself. And that's why I do it. It's very important to me, and it has helped people, which is another reason why I do it, because I feel that magical items should help people. Otherwise, what's the point?
How would somebody know what sort of magical materials to buy? Like, there's so many stores, so many choices right now. Yours is quite a well-known store. But how do you know who's legit?
It can be trial and error, unfortunately, within that, or you can talk to people. This is why I'm really honored when people come and they review things, because I think that can be really helpful, and that's on us to promote who we believe in. I've been doing this every month or so with like the creepy cute stuff that I do on YouTube, and so every so often I'll bring in like a witch store that I really believe in. Last month I brought in a Cavolta, and they work with a lot of poisons, and I'm like, yeah, I support the out of this because this is great, and their aesthetic is, and their scents work. And so the responsibility often comes to us to be well informed, but also on witches to share that which works for them. And word of mouth is a huge deal in witchcraft stuff, because a lot of the time there is a censorship thing that's happening. It's happening even more so now. I'm surprised Etsy sellers are still getting away with it, honestly, because last time I heard, Etsy was clamping down on magical items.
How can somebody make their own magical materials? Because I think a lot of people, especially new witches, they're like, ooh, I'm gonna try and I'm gonna mix all these ingredients, and the results, they get really disappointed.
I think natural talent is definitely going to make a huge difference, because you know whether you're a singer or not, you know whether you're musical or not, and this is no different. Witchcraft is an art. It's something that is definitely built upon. You definitely learn as you go, and you know, learn new methodologies, you learn new ways of doing things, you get better at it over time. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to put that investment into their magical creations, because that is it's a time sink, and it's frustrating. It can be frustrating, and things can and will go horribly wrong, even for people who do this, you know, day in, day out. I'll have days when certain candles will not work, and there's no reason for it. They've just decided that day that candles are not going to work, no matter what you do. And you're doing everything the same way you usually do it. There is no reason for it. And some days it just doesn't want to cooperate, especially with its magical items, because there's all these energies around it and spirits around it.
So for me, it's always sort of like this idea that, oh, the things that you make yourself are always going to be superior. Well, I don't know about that, because I've tried to put together IKEA furniture and I can't. It's always going to be lopsided. But, you know, like if somebody needs like some help in putting on some eyeliner, I'm always there.
I don't think there's anything wrong with supporting other witches in business, as long as you know that, you know, they're authentic, they mean it, it's their passion.
You know, that Instagram witch thing where it's like the whole lifestyle where you're just on point with everything. I don't know about you, Joey, but, you know, there's a lot of stuff in my life where I'm just like, wow, I am just totally shitty at this. I'm failing at this. And I still consider myself to be a witch.
I think people in that circumstance, they're taking the human out of what it means to be a witch. They're taking out that everybody has, you know, everybody has bad days. Everyone has days when they don't get out of their pajamas. Everyone has days when they're sick. Everyone has human experiences, and they're all just as valid as anything else. There isn't one way to be a witch, and that is delving a little bit again into that Instagram aesthetic, the negative side of what an aesthetic is. Like, if my life doesn't look as perfect as this aesthetic of what witchcraft is, then I have failed. And it's like, nobody's life looks like that. There are filters, that has been taken on purpose. It's been taken on purpose, whether it's for Instagram or because it looked like a really cool shot and then it was put on Instagram. But people pick and choose what they share with the world. And to some degree, I try and I play with that on purpose. So I on purpose will put pictures up of me with no makeup some days, and then some days I'm in full ritual, with the gemstones and the makeup and all of it, because I like to try and show that there is many different ways to play with this. It doesn't have to be one way, and it can tailor into what your witchcraft is. So sometimes it's going to be dirty and in the mud, and you're going to be falling on your ass, and it's going to look terrible to the outside world, but it doesn't take away what the experience means to you. And I think we become a little bit too obsessive sometimes about how our path looks to other people rather than what it means to us. And it's like this being judged thing. And it's very easy to fall into that trap on social media because everybody's looking at you. Everyone wants to know how you're doing things. How are you doing witchcraft? What does that mean? How does that look? And it's like, it doesn't have to look like anything unless you feel it needs to look that way. That's where the importance is, where you place it.
And I think that's what maybe a lot of beginner witches don't realize. Like, their entire life, if it's magical, everything they do, including the magical materials they make, is also going to be magical because it's sort of like it's going to contaminate in the best way everything else in their life.
You're always a witch underneath at all points. And that's the difference, I think. You know that's within you and who you are. So
yeah, and you know what? There are lots of women that I know who may not identify as a witch and may not even consider themselves in any way magical. So these are just regular people, and yet some of these regular people are the witchiest people that I know. It's like such a mindset issue that there are people who don't do the spells, who don't do the rituals, and yet their life is so magical and you can feel it. You can feel it, and when you're in their presence, you're just like, this bitch is a witch. You just know it. I personally think that poetry, aesthetics, all those things, like that state of mind that you get into is so important. And that's one of the reasons why I think for my interviews, the part of the interview where I asked the magician, what are the 3 songs that represent your magic the most popular part, hands down. Because I think that music, it can definitely alter your state of consciousness. So, Joey, what are your 3 songs?
The first one is probably In This Moment, Roots. That's probably the more Morriganic side of me, and it's very much like, thank you for everything you've put me through, and thank you for allowing me to put my roots down into the ground, and I will be resilient, and I will still be here. And that song just does things to me in ritual too. It makes me feel empowered. It makes me feel emboldened and fired up. It really does. There's something about it. So that would definitely be the first one. I think for the second one, I'm going to go a little bit lighter. The second one would probably be Curly Stardust. And that is because, again, like, I feel like I flip between aesthetics. So on one hand, it's very like Morrigan, grr, and like warrior. And then on the other hand, it's like things that sparkle and interconnectedness and the things that join us and finding our purpose through this gentleness and honoring who we are in transition. And I guess the final one that I was looking at, because it's difficult for me because it's like, well, there's so many. But the final one I think is Dorothy, which is Whiskey. And it's fun. It's empowered, but it's also fun. And it's kind of like challenging in a way. It's like a push-pull challenging kind of song that is kind of like the things that intoxicate us and make us like kind of crave more, and pushing outside of who we're told to be as well a little bit in that song. So those are the 3 that I was sitting there thinking it's probably those 3.
I feel like one of the great takeaways from talking to you is that, there are no rules. There are no, like, this is what you need to do to become a witch. This is what you need to do to get contact from the Morrigan. This is what you have to do. Your life has to be perfect or anything like that. It's sort of like, it truly is like authenticity, vulnerability, and bringing in this like true you. And that in itself is like building up the spiral of magic in you. Yeah,
absolutely. Who are you underneath? And peeling back the layers of who people have told you to be and finding who you are underneath.
Yeah, so guys, spiritual bypassing, probably not the best idea if you want to become truly authentic and within your power. You got to go through shit, and trust me, I went through some shit. Joey's went through some shit. When you look back at the shit that you've gone through, you're going to be like, okay, I see why I had to go through. When you're going through it, it sucks. But afterwards, you're just like, I see why. And it brings depth to your character. And people who are too afraid to go through shit, don't go looking for shit. You know what I mean? Don't be an idiot. Don't be afraid of it.
No.
It builds you. It builds you. So, guys, I'm going to put down below all the links to Joey's store, her books, her one-on-one curse work that you can book with her from Become a Living God. I know a lot of people who watch this channel are going to be like, oh, Become a Living God, like they're kind of against it. But it's sort of like, let's not put too much judgment on just the channel. You know what I mean? It's like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I'm not all bad, I promise.
Joey, thank you so much for speaking with me today and being so open about your journey.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.